painted. Phthalo green blue is the color listed here. This is what it looks like fully saturated, one stroke into the high gloss acrylic. This is what it looks like second line when it's thickened up. So you're looking at undertone versus mass tone. Then you've got 10% white added, 20% white added, and then the last line has that metallic concentrate I was telling you about, this super shine silver. Kind of hard to see, but it's really, it's made with aluminum, and it's a concentrate like everything else we sell. A little bit goes a long way. I'm going to demo that in a second. That, of course, works best and is most reflective with transparent pigments. So it looks great with phthalos. Quinacridones are a very transparent pigment class. I mean, it still looks good in matte situations, but not as brilliant. More opaque situations. Okay, so like in cobalt, you see it's not quite as bright in the metallic as it is in a phthalo. Okay, let me put my gloves back on and I will show you how the metallic works.
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
You don't have to put in the second binder if you don't want it to be, depending on what you want to do, right?
The second binder or the second additive? Yeah, those are, so the thickeners are called additives. And no, you don't have to do anything. You can, the only thing you have to do is mix this pigment dispersion into a binder. As I say, some people do use it straight on paper, but just be aware that that's gonna re-wet, you know, so if you were to take a paper towel and rub that, it's gonna come right off. But some people like to use it straight on paper and then maybe use a spray fix. But we like to recommend that you put it into some kind of binder.
Is it different from watercolors?
Different from watercolor? Well, in watercolor, you've got gum arabic as your binder. Noelle did a great watercolor video on our YouTube channel, of how to make them. So basically, it's real simple. The very basic watercolor recipe is the gum arabic powder, and I would always say 2/3 water, 1/3 gum arabic, but she likes, what, half and half, 50/50?
Yeah, just because I don't cook it. It's
and let
dirty
it,
all your dishes.
use distilled water, let it sit overnight. Some people heat it up and do it in double boiler, but that does change the color a little bit.
Yeah, it makes it yellow ever so slightly.
Yeah.
It's like not perceptible unless you like really let it sit for a long time, which it'll probably go bad before it starts to yellow appreciably.
And that's the thing about homemade watercolor. You have to put your binder that you make into the refrigerator because that's going to develop mold really quickly. But it is a very cost-effective way, especially if you want to do large watercolors. This is the way to go, definitely. And it's really easy. It's easy to do. Okay, back to the chart. So we talked about the general pigment classes. Within the general pigment classes are lots of subclasses with all these different, funny names. The naphthal's are a more opaque, organic pigment. Phthalos, another subclass. These are some of your strongest tinting strength pigments. Quinacridones tend to be very transparent. What else we got up here? Benzimidazos. Yellows traditionally don't have great tinting strength. These benzimidazos, which were developed for automotive, are super strong. So these are really nice yellows to use. Bismuth vanadate was created, that's an inorganic pigment, that was created as a replacement for cadmium, and it's really a super beautiful lemon yellow. There's all kinds of stuff up here. Then there's transparent oxides down here, which make, when added to the metallic that I was showing you, super shine silver on the last line here, they make beautiful, stable gold, silvers, coppers. Not silver, silver is what this looks like straight up. But lots of different coppers and golds, because as I mentioned, if you're going to make a gold with a bronze powder, that's going to tarnish a little bit on you. Although if you use our water-based urethane, that's less porous than acrylic, so it does give you a pretty good seal. And in our bronze charts, which are here, we have used the water-based urethane that I showed you, and it does work really well, actually. So these don't tend to tarnish. The urethane 32 gives it a nice seal. Let's see. let me show you textures. Anybody interested in textures? Okay. So this is a super cool system also for making textures that don't look plasticky. Because if you buy a texture medium in the store, it has to have a lot of the medium in it so that it has shelf life. Because if we make it the way we're gonna make it and try to package it, that's just gonna dry up on you. There's just no way. It's gotta have, you know, that moisture surrounding it. But if you're willing to make it and use it, you can have these incredible textures that adhere to your surface, but they just look like the texture, right? You don't see any of the acrylic there. And I'm gonna put this to the side or I'm gonna get messy.
It's really textured.
yeah. So these are called pumice rocks. Oh, we have pumice rocks, and then we have pumice boulders. So those are two different sizes. These are the pumice rocks. This is how they come. You want to pass it around? Fun stuff.
I don't even know what I would like use that.
And here is another example of a texture. This is one of Art Guerra's older paintings, very heavy.
Crazy.
This is, he loved tire rubber, so this is one of his crazy tire rubber paintings. And again, you just see the texture. You're not seeing the binder here. The binder is sort of secret and hidden and holding it on the surface really well, but you're just seeing solid texture.
Move over, Bill Resnick.
Oh, heavy. His painting. And then he got into glass bead paintings like this gold one here and those over there. Once again, you're just seeing the beads, right? You're not seeing the binder adhering it. So it's like this solid, brilliant stuff, but glass is heavy. These paintings would kill you. Okay, so let's make some texture. Container. Okay, and if you want to make and store your paint, we do sell these kind of containers. This is the cheapest way to go. This is the best way to go. This gives you the best seal. Actually, I meant to show you this binder too. So this is the binder I like to use. I used to have a sample of one of my paintings here, but we put all Art's paintings up. I use this crazy stuff called Ultralight. So this is a textured acrylic that's ready to go. You can get it straight out of the container like this. So you can build up a big texture. You can thicken a little bit with the thickener I just showed you to make it stiffer. But this is nice because you can get it super, like, huge surface if you want. Just keep building and building and building on top of this because it'll just stick to itself. And it's lightweight. It's very light. You can pass that around. What this stuff is it's a high resin acrylic mixed with micro glass balloons, which we don't sell dry because they're very airborne. They get all over the place. But once they're in the acrylic, it becomes this like marshmallow fluff kind of stuff,
Really want this chocolate.
which I will show you now.
You know what I mean? Like they just like weird stuff.
And this is just like thick and creamy and beautiful.
We probably shouldn't talk about environment.
Okay, so this is called Ultralight. It looks like this, super thick, really creamy.
Marshmallowy.
So again, I'm gonna make some paint. I'm gonna start with my binder to determine how much paint I'm gonna make. This particular one, because it has so much texture in it, which in this case is the micro glass balloons, and not as much binder, we need to put plastic on the surface of the paint so it doesn't dry up. So this one we sell with plastic on it, and then once you use it, you gotta like push that plastic down on the surface.
What is a microglass balloon?
Those are actually, it's a dry filler, and it is used industrially in making boat paint to make the boats more aerodynamic through the water. And it's just, visually, it's just this like white powdery stuff, but they're actually tiny little glass balloons.
It's ceramic.
It's glass.
They call it glass. not
Micro
ceramic.
glass balloons. Yeah,
Little balloons made of
glass bubbles, they call them. Yeah, this wild stuff. It's really weird.
The rock and glass are closely
Well,
related.
and ceramic is also glass.
Uh-huh.
I'm gonna make
Because
this
it's been vitrified.
ultralight into a paint now. Now you can use all this stuff straight if you want, just, you know, as a white texture. Or you can add color to it and then it becomes more of a paint. So again, I'm shaking. This one is called Quinacridone Violet 55. It's a gorgeous color.
Oh.
Give it a little squirt. Stir it up. Now the ultralight is very white, and unlike the acrylics, which are white when they're wet or milky when they're wet and dry clear, this is not going to dry clear because it's got those little white balloons in there that are making this more of a white base. So it takes more color to overcome the whiteness of this one. But also all paint dries darker than what you see, so this is going to dry darker. Let me get another piece of paper. Oh, thank you. Oh, I got too much stuff here. Okay. Actually, let me wrap this off. Thank you.
What are monomers and polymers used for in the larger world?
Plastics. Anything you can think of that's plastics. Yeah.
Wow.
Okay, so this is the texture of this straight out of the bottle. Yeah, and then yeah, this is, people love this stuff. I'm gonna thicken it a little bit and make it more stiff. What I do in my work is I use a pastry bag, so I need to thicken this stuff up so it's really stiff, so it holds a form once I pipe it out. Okay, so that,
It's like meringue.
yes, it's kind of like meringue, yeah.
Do you have something to make it shiny?
That's Texas meringue.
You can always
Texas
go
meringue.
over this
Texas-
with a coat
Because
of
it's
either
big?
acrylic or
Because it's
urethane.
big?
Because it's made
To make
from
it
monomers
glossy.
and polymers.
But this is very matte because the micro balloons are matting out the resin. And anytime you buy a matte, medium, matte paint of any kind, it started as a gloss and then a powder is added to it to make it matte. So that's important to understand.
Could you repeat that,
Yeah.
Karen? Sorry.
Anytime you buy a matte paint, matte medium, what have you, it started as a glossy resin and then they added some kind of powder to it to make it matte. So like in our case, when we have the silica flat, the base of it is actually the high resin acrylic, then silica powder is added to that to make it matte. What that means is there's already something in the mix with the adhesion, so you can't water that down as much as you can a straight glossy resin. You can add a lot more water to a straight glossy resin and get away with it still forming a film and being a stable paint than you can with a matte paint. That said, you also want to be a little bit careful of oversaturating a matte paint and also adding water. So we've had a few circumstances where people are like, "What? My paint is peeling off." I'm like, "What exactly did you do?" "Well, I added about 70% water and then a bunch of color." Okay, you just overcame the adhesive property, the adhesive ability of the binder. So you have to be a little bit sensitive to that. And here is
And is silica flat the flattest binder?
the flattest one we have.
Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely is. Yeah, it's like an acrylic gouache. It's got a little bit of tooth.
Acrylic gouache.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
No, that's
Yeah,
a good
yeah.
question.
Yeah.
That's the way we talk about it because it's got
Yeah.
that little bit of tooth.
Yeah.
It's not opaque. That depends on what pigment you add to it. Gouache is typically opaque because
Opaque,
it's
uh-huh.
gouache is a watercolor that has calcium carbonate added to it, which is a chalk. We also sell that, so you can make your own gouache too. And the calcium carbonate is what makes it opaque in a gouache situation. Yes.
Is the acrylic 65 the one that's they're running out of, or that they're not making?
The acrylic 65 and the 65 and the 60 are the same acrylic actually. The 60 we sell. Well, we do some formulating, but that's unthickened. The 65 is the 60 with the thickener that I showed you added to it, so it's got more body. And yeah, we haven't been able to get that. So we're on to stand 6,
Cool.
which still looks really good. It's super glossy. It thickens up well. I will say the one, oh hey, a Brooklyn Rail is here. Everybody gets a new Brooklyn Rail. Yay! Thank you. Where was I going? I forget. Let's see. Oh, I wanted to show you the percentage ladder. Did I put that? That must
I
be
showed
it.
that for gentlemen. It's on the wall there.
Oh, okay. So, because we were talking about the importance of having your paint adhere to the surface, this is an example of working with dry pigment and knowing what you can and can't get away with. The best way, the silica flat is the most matte binder we have, but actually the best way to get a super matte opaque paint that's really brilliant is to use dry pigment. But you need to be willing to have it be opaque, because if you try to use dry pigment in a transparent application, you're going to see the pigment particle grains, you know, like we see here. Hard to see because this is a very fine pigment, but that you can see them. So, but if you're using the paint opaquely, you don't have to worry about that. You're not going to see those pigment particles. So what you're looking at here is, this says 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. I believe Art made this. That looks like his handwriting. So you start with adding, you start with the pigment and then add 10% binder to it. Always good when you're working with dry pigment. I guess I'll just do it. Now, we like to always advise that you wear masks. Everybody's got their mask on when working with dry pigment. This is a very non-toxic pigment, so I'm not going to worry about it right now. And I'm also going to handle it very, very gently. This is ultramarine. And you can see how brilliant it looks in its raw pigment form. This is R4, so that's 4 degrees towards red. This is one of Art's spoons. He used to fold a piece of paper and call it a spoon. Okay, so the way you make a crude paint, and again, if you're using dry pigment, you really want to be wearing an N95 mask. These other kind of masks we wear for the pandemic are not going to cut it for pigments if you really want to protect yourself. And you want to be more careful with the metal pigments. We don't want to get, we like to say, I think I already said this, but we'll say it again. All artist materials are chemicals. Be cautious and careful. But everything we sell is on the low end of hazard. So there's a chronic hazard and there's an acute hazard. We don't sell anything that's an acute hazard. But artist chemicals are considered chronic hazard, meaning that if you're really sloppy over time, you get like tons in your skin over time, you know, or breathe a bunch. Actually, glitter is, believe it or not, very dangerous. I had a customer who inhaled too much glitter and had to have a surgery. So yeah, you want to be careful you're not breathing anything in. So yeah, but this particular pigment is considered non-toxic. It's ultramarine, and I'm going to add, so the way you work with dry pigment, you start with, well, it's going to depend on how much paint you're trying to make. I'm not making too much, so I'm just going to use a little dry pigment. And of course, pigment becomes much more efficient once it's been ground. It goes farther, so less goes farther. When you're using dry pigment, you need to use a little bit more to achieve the saturation you want. Also, this happens to be a very weak pigment. Ultramarines are weak by nature, which goes back to that property I was talking to you about tinting strength. So ultramarines have a very low tinting strength. Okay, I'm going to add a little dispersed water. I'm going to add a splash of water. The dispersed water helps to wet the dry pigment. If I was to just use water, it's going to be very hard to mix the water into the pigment, and all pigments are different with this too. Some pigments are more hydrophilic, some pigments are more hydrophobic. This one's kind of in the middle.
I have a
Actually, it's a
question.
little did someone ask a question?
I was about to ask. When you say grind the pigments, is that when are you grinding the pigments into the dispersion? Is that what you mean by that? Or do you grind them dry and then mix them with the dispersion?
Grinding process is what happens in the mill. You take
Okay.
the dry pigment and it goes into the ceramic ball mill with the surfactant. And then and the ceramic ball mill has these little ceramic balls in it, and it spins and spins and spins for 24 to 48 hours, and the little balls smash the pigment around. and separate all the particles, so you go from this to this, and it radically changes the color. Right now we're doing it the very crude way, so it's a different kind of thing, but we're just demonstrating how a dry pigment can make a very opaque, brilliant paint, and how it's going to change it visually depending on how much binder you add, because the binder in this version was just 10% binder. The acrylic is grabbing the pigment particle from underneath, but you're still seeing it reflect on the surface, the actual pigment. But what that means is if I take a wet paper towel and rub it on there, it's probably going to come off a little bit. So you have to decide what works for you. You know, am I okay with it? I'm sorry, the purple from my glove is coming off, but a little bit of blue is coming off. Like, are you okay with that on your painting? Is it okay if some of the pigment comes off? It's the only way to get this particular look of this super matte, super brilliant. You have to have the pigment particle be exposed on the surface and only adhered from the back. But what you have to sacrifice is the fact that you'll be able to, some of that's gonna rub off. So I'm gonna go back to actually doing it now. Now, if I was gonna hand grind, are you familiar with a glass muller and a glass palette? That would be the way you would want to do it. So that's sort of manually doing what we do in the mill. It's not going to be as fine a grind as, it's not like if you were trying to do it manually with this color, Quinacridone Gold, with the glass muller, you're never going to get to this. But you'll get beyond this. You definitely will. So right now, I'm not even going to mess with the muller. I'm just mixing this. And it's mixing right in because I use the surfactant. If I had just used water, it would be a little gummy. It would be hard to get this to turn into a liquid. So when you're making like a crude opaque paint, you would make a liquid first with your powder and some dispersed water. And then just add, I always just eyeball stuff. You can totally measure, you can be very exact. I just eyeball stuff. So 10% would be just like a little dab. The one thing I don't have is a pen. Yeah.
So why would someone purchase this over that? Would it be to get the matte?
It's if you're going for the matte, really. Oh, thank
Right.
you.
So if you want something that's like this, you wouldn't really buy this.
I always steer people away from the dry because also it's very airborne.
Right.
You know, it's a little. That's considered non-toxic pigment, but anything becomes toxic.
Yeah.
Baby powder becomes toxic if you breathe a bunch of it.
Could you
So-
just like put this on and like rub it? You can't really do that.
People do, but there's nothing holding it to make it stick and adhere.
Right.
It's just gonna fall off.
Like sand, right?
What's that?
Like it would be like sand, like you would rub it onto like a surface and then you just tip it over and it just.
A certain amount of it's gonna stain. Like if I
Yeah.
took that and just rubbed it on the paper, a lot of that's gonna rub into the paper, especially phthalos. They're so migratory. My husband is just like in hell when he makes these into dispersion. Because even if he's fully covered in the suit, which he wears, the Tyvek suit, and the mask and everything, it goes through everything because it's a tiny little pigment particle and it's migratory. So everything becomes blue. It's crazy. I have photos of him as the blue man. So I'm making my percentage ladder and I do 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. And again, I'm not,
This is 10%.
yeah, and again, I'm not
of
being
what?
a binder.
Yeah, just a binder. Okay.
I'm not being very precise, but I'm just showing you the process because this is a good thing to do in the studio so you understand, you know, what ratio of binder you like for this particular look if you're going for this matte opaque thing.
How would you compare your binders and mediums to Golden's, for example?
You know, I don't use their stuff really, but I can speak to the fact that ours is super high resin. You can do a lot with it. You can thin it out. Some people are very attached to their golden mediums, and as I say, if you want to add our color to their stuff, well, lots of people do that, so it's totally fine. I mean, they have matte ones, they have glossy ones, they have, like we do, they have textured ones. I think they have a wider range. Our focus is really the pigment concentrates, the dispersion. That's where our wide range comes in. The binders are kind of ancillary for us. It's just part of the paint component system, but really where we shine is in our wide range of color. So the color is really our focus. Okay. I forgot where I was at. I might have added too much. So, but you get the idea. So this is what you want to do. And then when this dries, it's going to be like this. So what we're seeing here is it's getting darker as you add more acrylic, because the acrylic is now encapsulating the pigment and making it darker, and it's not reflecting the light as much. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
But is that only if you're using this, or would that happen with the other color?
If you were to use, you could kind of do the same thing with the dispersion, but the dispersion is so finely ground that it's not going to, because one thing you're seeing here is a difference in the surface area, and all those pigment particles are actually stuck together and really like sitting up there on the surface and reflecting. So if you're going for that particular kind of look, sometimes it's better to go with the dry pigment. However, you can do something very similar by oversaturating with the liquid pigment. You can certainly do the same process, but particularly to get this like Yves Klein matte blue looking thing, it's probably the best way to do it is with the dry pigment.
But I mean, like, if you were to add more of this to those, that red right there, in that format, it wouldn't make it darker, would it?
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
So yeah, as I was saying, you know, acrylics are milky when they're wet, but they dry clear. So yes, that is going to get darker.
Oh.
Yeah, definitely.
I would think it would be like the opposite, but I guess it's just because that's white. So.
Yes, yeah. Visually, what you're seeing the wet while the white while it's wet, and that's going to always dry darker. Typically, paint always dries darker. Yeah. Okay. Oh, I wanted to show you making textures. That's what we were going to do. Okay, and this has been a little project of mine I've been wanting to do, is make these little samples of the dry textures and then stick them up over there next to the dry textures so people can touch and feel. I mean, we have these sample books that are cool, and you guys can feel free to grab these and look at these, but this is the pumice rocks. No, that was the pumice boulders. Pumice rocks. And this is what it looks like straight, and then with color added, and then with the metallic added. This is the extra coarse pumice, the coarse pumice, medium pumice, fine pumice,
Pumice is just a rock.
extra fine pumice. What's that?
Pumice is the rock.
Pumice is a rock, yeah. And it's very lightweight. So if you guys want to pass around the book, it's really fun to look at. And then we've got the same thing with the glass beads. This one I like in particular, this sample, just because the green looks so nice. This is glass bead number 5. We have a wide range of different sizes of glass beads, from fine to really large. Up to number 3 is the biggest size of our recycled glass beads. The recycled glass beads are what they use in the road paint to make it reflect. So they come along, one truck lays down the paint, another truck comes behind and sprays down the beads, and then just whatever sticks, and the rest flies off. And so you can see here, it says, it's mixed in here. Same kind of idea with what I was just showing you with the percentage ladder. When the material is more on the surface, it's gonna reflect the light better. So like on the roads, they sprinkle it on, whatever sticks, that reflects the light best. When you mix it straight into the binder, it's not going to be quite as reflective. So this is another reason why it's not great to buy a pre-made glass bead gel, because it's never going to be as reflective as you want it to be. If you sprinkle it on top, you get your binder down first, it's way more reflective. So here where it says sprinkled on, it catches the light a lot better. But I'll pass this around so you can see. But quickly I'll flip through the book. Oh, these are glass flakes. This is another thing we have. Fine glass flake. Okay, so this is the glass bead 16. These are the finest. Actually, we have a glass powder too. I don't have a paint out of it. Glass beads 8. Glass beads 3. So this is the biggest glass bead. Glass beads 5. That should be before 3. Then we go to these molded glass beads. So we started carrying some larger glass beads a while ago. And so there's baby jumbo, mini jumbo, and whoa, sorry, falling apart here. There's jumbo. And now you're getting into some really heavy texture. This is heavy material, but we have a high resin binder that can hold this stuff, and you can just like stick it on your surface, which is what Art Guerra did on these paintings here. There's actually a mix of different sizes of glass beads, and then of course you can throw pigment in there. And if you add the metallic to the glass beads, that becomes extra sparkly. Okay. So, let's pass that around. So let's make a glass bead paint. Okay. Actually, this is a good amount to start with, so I'm just gonna, in this case, when you want to make a solid texture paint, rather than starting with your binder to determine your paint volume, start with your texture. Now, like pigments, some textures are hydrophobic. That would be, especially in the case of tire rubber. Remember, tire rubber was what was used in, I'll do it again, this painting of Art Guerra's. And in order to make this kind of solid texture, and Art, I'm pretty sure Art, you see how brilliant the color was on that, the blue? I'm pretty sure he was using the dry pigment mixed the way we just did there to really reflect the light, because he was all about having color and reflectivity in his paintings.
What's the difference between acrylic and latex paint?
Latex is like a cheaper acrylic. Typically that might yellow on you, whereas these more high-end acrylics are non-yellowing. Okay, since I was talking about the tire rubber, let me make that into a paint. Now, the tire rubber is one that you really need to use the disperse water with, because these are actually recycled tires, which are kind of oily. So these want to reject water. So in order to get this to accept water better, when I put the water in, it'll kind of bead up. Kind of sits on the surface. I don't know if you can see that. Now I'm going to add this dispersed water. Here it is. Which is a surfactant that aids in wetting. We have to use this in pigments, but it's helpful with textures too. I'm going to add that. So whenever you're making a dry texture, the process is start with the dry texture to determine the volume you want to make. Usually it would be to add a little water first, just wet it so it's damp but not liquidy, and then add a little disperse water and then mix it up. Just so it looks kind of wetted and damp, like that. You don't want to see any fluid down the bottom. Wetting this first is going to help us to use less acrylic, because our goal here is to have it look not so acrylic-y and more texture-y. So roughly the ratio with textures is about 20% acrylic. Should be enough to hold it, but not overcome it and have it not look plasticky. So it should still just look like the texture, but it's enough. And again, I'm just eyeballing this. And you can do percentage ladders in your studio with the dry textures too, just to see like what's gonna stick best, what looks best when it's dry to your eye. That still looks pretty dry, but I know from experience that that's actually probably enough to still stick. So
that's all you have to do.
yep. So I'm gonna put that down. Let me get this stuff out of the way. And maybe I'm wrong, maybe that's not quite enough.
So if you wanted to color, sorry.
What's that?
If you wanted to color it, you
Yeah,
could
we
put
can
the
color it,
in at
yep.
the end.
Add a little bit more. Okay, that's definitely enough. Now, I'm gonna add, let's add a little, oh, I never put my squeeze cap on there. I'm gonna add a little phthalo turquoise, which is super strong. Let me tap, shake. In case any pigment settled. Now this is a black material I'm trying to color, so it's not gonna look that different, but you'll see it come out on the paper. We'll see it more when we go to color the glass beads. When I meant to do this on my little panels. We'll do that with the beads. Okay. So you can kind of see it. But if I were to like rub that over there, you see how much phthalo is in there.
You guys are just gonna dry and stay like that?
Yep. Yep. Let's see, I think I've got a tie rubber book around here somewhere.
That's like the color of my favorite roller coaster as a kid.
Oh, the Quin Violet 55. Cool. Okay, I'm gonna make.
Like a headache already.
So I'm gonna do these little panels right now with some glass beads. The first thing I want to do is put down flat white base, so the bead is gonna have something to adhere to. So the flat white base is like a high-end gesso that we sell, and that's gonna go nicely onto the surface of this, and that's gonna make a nice coating for the bead then to grab onto, because our solid textures are mostly texture, not a lot of binders. We want to give it the best chance of adhering to a surface as possible. If I was to put this straight bead right on the raw wood, it's not going to stick that great because there isn't that much. We're using as little binder as possible. They all have tiny little brushes.
You want a palette knife?
Yeah.
A larger one?
It's okay. Okay, so I'm just gonna. Now, ideally, it's good to let an acrylic dry for at least 24 hours, but I'm gonna be risky. So now I need to spread this with a brush because I don't want it to be too. All right, but so you see how great coverage this flat white base is. So one coat is really all you need to give it a nice white opaque. The table is getting so messy. I put too much paint on here, so now I have to scrape it off. So yeah. Ideally, I would let this dry for a while before I put my beads on there, but it'll be okay. Okay, that's thin enough. That'll start to, our acrylics are like any other water-based paint. It's gonna start to dry pretty quick, 10 minutes, it'll start to form a film. It takes 24 hours to fully cure. The thicker it is, the longer it takes to dry and the longer it takes to cure. This, when you have a really thick piece of paint, like this that we did, that's gonna take, you better wait about a week at least before that's fully cured. Also, if it's humid outside, if it's raining or just humid, paint is not drying because it's all about evaporation. So that's a good thing to keep in mind. Okay, beads. All right, so I'm gonna start with my beads. I've got baby jumbo glass beads here. Beads are so slick, they don't really require the addition of surfactant, but for the sake of continuing to show you how to mix dry textures, I'll go ahead and do that. So I'm just gonna add a little bit of dispersed water. That helps, that would be good to use with the pumice because this is very absorbent. It just helps in wetting, it helps, the surfactant, that's its main job that it does, it helps wet things. Okay, so I put that in there. use the back end of brushes as my stirrer. Just to do a splash of water, just enough to just wet it. Because if I wet my dry texture first, that means I can use less acrylic. It's just gonna go in that much more readily. Okay. Oh, yes, that's it. Okay. Now again, it's about 20% acrylic to your dry texture. That might have been more like 10. Once again, I'm eyeballing, but it's becoming milky, so I think I have enough acrylic. Now, I'm gonna put that on there straight. And you see how dry it looks? But, let me spread it around. I'm pretty sure that I've got enough acrylic in there for this to adhere once it dries.
Thank you.
I'm just gonna spread it around. And then we'll have a nice little sample we'll put up. I have a speck of something in there. Scoop that off. Okay. I might be a little low on binder, but I still think that that's going to dry and stick to the surface. If you're going to do your painting, you probably want a little bit more than that. I think I use more like 10%. 20 is a better idea, so I'm going to add a little bit more. Now let's go back and use our phthalo again. Color this. This is super strong. Phthalos are really, really strong. I should have a squeeze top on here, but I just don't have one right now. Okay, so I just used a drop, and that really is making that. Again, that's going to dry darker, but you see how that made it really rich. Okay. Like that. Here. Oh, my glass bead's there. Okay, and then I'll add the metallic to that. Because as I said, when you add the metallic to the glass beads, I should have shaken that first too. Always shake first. The metallics are super concentrated also. A little bit goes a long way, so now I've got a super metallic glass bead. Ooh. So you're getting the idea. Sky's the limit. People generally come in here and tell us what they'd like to do. We go in the back, we pull out all the stuff, we let you get your hands in it, and you can just make paint of your dreams. Anything you want to do is possible. You can make paint out of anything. One time we had a guy come in with his father's ashes. He wanted to make paint out of his father's ashes. Believe it or not, yeah. And Art helped him with that, and he did it.
That's a no pressure painting.
Right? It was really crazy. It was the craziest thing that's ever happened here. And there've been a lot of crazy things. Yeah.
Anish Kapoor, apparently
Vanda Black.
he found the darkest black that exists, and he didn't he like patent it or something? So
Yeah, I
only
believe he did.
could use it. I mean,
Yeah.
Is this something that was mined?
That's
This
no,
black?
that's nanoparticle black. It's actually highly toxic. Nanoparticles are just teeny, and they can get into your body and be very bad.
So it's totally chemical.
But it makes an incredible black, like a black hole black.
And then I had a question, like, for all these colors that are going extinct, are they finding any new ones? I mean,
No, sadly, with the swallowing up of the smaller companies, the specialization has gone out the window. And also, something I didn't address is the importance of knowing the source of where your pigments are coming from, because a couple of decades ago, the big chemical companies started outsourcing to other companies, and sadly the formulas were stolen, so a lot of cheap knockoffs flooded the market. We refuse to buy those cheap knockoffs. We will only buy from long-established, time-trusted companies, which are incredibly expensive, especially with this raw material crisis that's going on. The surcharges, it's insane. But we insist, so we've had to raise our prices, and it just depends what happens. But the point is, if you don't know the source of your pigments, you can have stuff that just fades on you. And that's terrible if you're trying to make a painting that's going to last. So it's important to know your source. And to answer Laura's question a little better, with the larger companies swallowing up the smaller companies, the specialization sort of went out the window, and no, they're not developing any new chromophores. That just hasn't happened in a while. Who knows? What's that?
What about
Yinmin Blue? Yeah, that's true. I think that was developed in university more as like a project.
I think it was an accident.
And it's insanely expensive. We are planning on getting a hold of it, and Jody wants to make it into a dispersion actually, which would be really expensive. It's probably going to be $200 for a 1 ounce. But we want to do it, and
what is the name of it again?
Yinmin Blue.
Yinmin.
Yeah, it kind of looks like, visually, it looks like a cross between an ultramarine and a cobalt. It sort of lies somewhere in between those. So yeah, that is a new pigment that was recently discovered. But other than that, in the actual chemical laboratories, they're not working on new chromophores right now, and haven't been for quite some time. So we'll see what happens.
Was an accident.
What's that?
I had a question on the crystallina when it says burnish onto dry.
Yeah,
palette.
right, doesn't that look cool?
Burnished.
Burnished means the glitter is dropped right on top of the acrylic and then rubbed.
Oh.
And it has a completely different look than how it looks when you sprinkle it on or mix it in.
Oh, so it's dried and then you.
Yeah, the acrylic is dried, but the acrylic is tacky even when it's dry.
Okay.
It's soft. It's a high resin soft acrylic, so you can put the glitter on and kind of press it in and rub it, and it has a whole different.
Do you just rub it with like a towel? Like how would you? With
Yeah,
a knife?
like a chamois, something soft. So I'll
Yeah,
put
those
that in
are
the camera
cool.
too, so you can see the burnished section is the second line down. The top section is sprinkled on top of the acrylic. The bottom one is mixed in. So again, same concept with dry particle being more reflective when it's sitting on the surface. Once it's mixed into the acrylic, it becomes encapsulated and less reflective. So I think that's pretty much the basics for our presentation for today.
Thank you.
Thank you. But, please ask any questions. And we've got all kinds of crazy samples to look at. I've got more color charts that were painted out with different mediums. We've got a watercolor one, an egg tempera one. Yeah, there's all sorts of things to look at.
I have a question. I was going to ask you about pigment origins. Do you list where they're from on the bottles?
Not on the bottles. There's only so much room on the bottle. On the bottle, we have the opacity, the tinting strength, the blue wool scale, which is the industrial version of the ASTM, which gives you 1 number of the light fastness, whereas the blue wool scale gives you 3 with different amounts of white. And then the size of the bottle, and then some, general instructions and, hazard warnings, which is just a general, as I said, we only sell low hazard things. It's just a disclaimer. But that's all we can fit on this label. So we are there's more information on the website. You can always just ask us. The color chart that we have 2 color charts. We have one that is a 3-page that looks like this. So this one has it's the same colors as this, but it's painted with the matte acrylic wash silica flat. And this one has a stroke of the color with it tinted out with white a little bit. So this shows you, how it looks once you start to tint it. This chart it's the same chart, but because it's got all this information in the boxes, it's spread out over 8 pages. So it's the same amount of colors, but it's 8 pages. And Noelle is working on this right now. So yeah, we can't fit all the information onto the labels, but it is all in this chart, and on this chart it tells you the actual pigment class. It doesn't say where it's from, but they're all made in laboratories. Like the benzimidazolones come from Clariant. A lot of the other organic pigments come from BASF, which has now been bought by Sun Chemical. So, I mean, we're happy to share that information with you, because as I said, when we're some of the only people that will do that, because we insist on buying from these very supreme sources, and we're happy to talk about that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, I just had another question about the crystallina. So this is the, like, these crystals are this color, this like pink, peach color. And then is it over white or what?
Clear. That's a clear. So that's this acrylic. No, that's not it. This one, which is milky when it's wet, but it dries clear. So you can see it on the edge of the bottle how it's clear.
Got it. All right, that was my
Yeah. And so that visually, it looks, once you rub it in, it just looks less intense than that, because less of it. This is more of a concentration you're looking at, so you see more of a volume color of what the glitter actually looks like. But it's fascinating how different it looks in the burnished version. Yeah, it's super cool.
If you were to sprinkle, like, I'm sure you can sprinkle this pink crystal on like this. And it's,
Oh yeah, you can do anything. Yeah, and that would have a whole different look.
Right.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening.
so the dispersion, I know you. This is what's going on here.
Yes, exactly.
Could you just remind, I know you're talking about it.
Yeah, sure. Let me just put this in the water. Okay. So. Yeah, this is another radical change, right? This is the dry pigment just mixed with acrylic.
Oh, okay.
This is the dispersion. Once the pigment's been ground in the mill.
Oh, okay. So it's basically the difference between this and like,
And this. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
I was confusing those.
Yeah.